All right, we're back here on a Wednesday night here on the Chase Thomas podcast, taping this late on a Wednesday where it's not just Matt Green on the full ride tonight. No, it's a family affair. It is a family affair. Cousin Sam making his return to the podcast. First time on video. Cousin Sam, Matt Green. How are y'all?
Doing good, Chase. I think the last time I was on your show, I said Willie Taggart would be a better coach, better hire than Dan Mullen, and that didn't really work out.
Oof. Well, I don't think it really worked out for either at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, but I guess enough time has passed to where, maybe people listen to what I have to say and, maybe I'll say something smart.
Everyone was in on the Willie Taggart hire.
I respect that you're owning it right there, right out of the gate.
Yeah, I like it. Did I say Dan Mullen was a good hire? I don't remember. I feel like I probably did, right? I was probably on the Mullen is the better hire of that too.
I think at least probably what he would do at Mississippi State, he'd be able to do at Florida, but he kind of did it, but for a little while and then just crashed and burned.
We all thought Mullen was a good hire. It just made sense with Florida. We didn't realize that just everyone just disliked him as a person. Like that was just, how could we know that,
I remember talking to Edgar. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, I guess unless you cover it every day, then how would you know that?
Well, that's the whole thing with Edgar Thompson at the Orlando Sentinel. I remember I had him on a few weeks ago and he was telling me about Mullen. He knows Mullen pretty well. And it was one of those things where Mullen's usually the smartest guy in the room. And he knows that he's usually the smartest guy in the room. And that was my whole thing. It's like Mullen's just, he doesn't want to do the recruiting stuff, but I think when Georgia fans and other people dunk on it, I'm like, the dude deserves a statue at Mississippi State. Getting them to number one is just insane. Like, I don't know if that will ever happen again. Mississippi State ever getting to number one in the country.
Is that statue worthy?
That's statue worthy in Starkville. Like, I would build a statue for that.
10-3 season. I mean, it was a great season, but
would you not give Gary Pinkel a statue at Mizzou for getting Mizzou to number one? I think we have to think about that kind of thing.
At least made a few conference championships, right? Big 12 and SEC. I don't know.
I think it's a little bit easier.
He was there for like 15 years. What was Mullen there? Like 7, 8
years? He was close to a
so?
decade. Mullen was there for a while. I don't know. I think he's the best coach in their history. I mean, unless you're a big
I think 2009 was his first season.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. Sam, I like the Willie Taggart thing. I wonder if that's something with Miami fans, if they're kind of worried about it. It's like the last big Oregon hire that moved over to the state of Florida did not go all that great in the state of Florida. So we'll see. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of, both come in with a lot of hype. So, and a lot of, buzz on the recruiting trail. So, you just have to see when they actually, coach a game, how it goes.
Absolutely.
I think Cristobal's had a little more success at a higher level before coming over, but every situation's different, so we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Well, we were arguing do you remember the text thread, the family, Matt, you've known about this because I've talked about it out loud with the family group chat, and we had a big debate. I guess it was last summer where I was like, Miami is definitely the sleeping giant of the three in Florida, where we had this whole debate of like who should be the best program and who has the means to be the best program. And I was like, I don't know how it's not Miami. They don't have their stuff together, but it should be Miami. And lo and behold, the billionaire pops out and now Miami's back. They get Cristobal. They assemble a super staff. They take Francis Malagoa from Tennessee. They bring in a 5-star and a 4-star quarterback in the same class. It's preposterous what they're doing, but Miami just woke up. They have money that Florida and
have they?
I think they're awake.
Say, let's wait until they play some games here before we're saying they're back, right?
Like, I'm not saying they're back, but they're awake. Miami is awake. This is the most awake Miami has been as a program, I think, in 22 years, 21 years. I mean, there's actual reason to be excited about this version, especially with NIL and where things are. I think they're in the Texas A&M trajectory where it's like they're just going to have too many blue chippers to fail. Like it's just too many 4 and 5 stars for them not to go at least 8-4, 9-3. Like they're the floor is so
they'll go
high.
8-4 and 9-3, but it'll just be a very exciting 8-4, 9-3.
It'll be 9-3 with a bunch of NFL players. So yeah, that's cool.
Did y'all see the ESPN FPI that came out today?
I didn't see it. No.
Auburn's in the top 10 in ESPN FPI to start the year.
Really?
Auburn's in the top 10. That just blew my mind. I was looking through it, and Texas A&M's not even in the top 4. It's very strange. It's a very strange top 5. But I like the Football Power Index. It's a pretty good indicator. But I seem to recall, I think either S&P Plus or FPI loved Mississippi State last year, and Matt and I were trying to figure that one out.
I remember that. Yeah,
yeah,
that was
where
weird.
they had them as like a top 15 team, and that was just like, that's not happening.
I think they were top 10.
Yeah,
it didn't. What did they finish, like 7-6 or something?
I don't even did they 6-6? I don't think they got to 7. I don't remember off the top of my head. It feels like they barely made bowl eligibility because they lost the Egg Bowl, and that was a fun one. But they could not block Williams on the edge.
7-6, yeah, finished 7-6 last year.
So they must have won the bowl game, right?
I'm guessing so.
Because I think they were 6-6 in the regular season, I want to say. But yeah, so we've got a craziness like what happened tonight before. Actually, hold on. We'll get into the ACC Pac-12, another handshake agreement, because folks, let me tell you, as much as we like to believe that hey, these people have a lot of money, they're well paid, they're extremely wealthy, they have very, very strong titles, very impressive titles, but it's the little things that remind you they don't know what they're doing. Where you see handshake agreement, where there is this olive branch that the Pac-12 and the ACC have thrown. It's a year ago the alliance was built on similar grounds, and we're doing this all over again, just different people in charge. So that's going to be something we'll talk about that in a second.
Chase, you're not a fan of loose relationships?
No, I am not. There is something different when as you know, Sam, there's something different when you put your name and you sign a binding agreement. There's it's a little bit different than dating someone and being locked in marriage, I think.
So is that why you're getting married? You just need to lock that in, a contractual binding agreement?
The contractual, hey man, you're locked in. Like you want to go ahead and you're engaged too. You can't give me all this grief too, man. You're doing the same thing I'm doing.
That's fair.
Yeah. Well, Sam, he's well ahead of us, Matt. He's got it's funny too. He named his child after me, not Chase, because that's not my legal name. But that was a stunner. That we have a lot of crossover because obviously fiance named Sam, Samantha, and now he's naming his son after me. So it's a lot of crossover in the Sam Thomas and Chase Thomas households as of right now.
That's good stuff.
It is. So how many days until college football, Matt Green?
We are 58 days till college football season, and I had to come up with the best 58 of all time. We got a Florida State guy here on the pod today. Got to go Peter Boulware. 1996 ACC Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, consensus All-American that year. Was 4th pick in the draft that year. 19 sacks his junior season. Just straight up baller. Part of those great Ravens teams. I was actually shocked to find out he's not a Hall of Famer. 4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. I guess that's not necessarily a Hall of Fame resume, but I think of Peter Boulware just maybe because he's part of that amazing Ravens defense. But that's just one of the best defensive players of all time. Those Florida State teams back in the 90s were just pro factories, like just absurd the talent they had on those rosters.
Yeah, I think that was play to the echo of the whistle, as Mickey Andrews used to say. So, yeah, they definitely did not take prisoners on defense.
That's funny. I wonder if part of the Boulware Hall of Fame case is kind of hurt. It's like the Lance Briggs thing, where you don't want to be the other linebacker next to the all-time great with Brian Urlacher, where it's like Ray Lewis is the Ravens guy, and you remember Ray, and Boulware's kind of forgotten in that group. Is that?
Well, he might be one of what year did he retire? He might be one of those guys where, as more time passes, he'll get his due, and
it's been a while, right?
Lance Briggs, that's definitely a good example, but he was also like the same type of player as Urlacher, like inside linebacker, right?
I think
Peter Boulware was like a different, like a pass rusher, so he wasn't necessarily like the same type player as Ray Lewis.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, and I think he was 05. I think is when they said he retired. So I think shoulder injuries would kind of cost him. So he's like a 9-year career or so.
He's been out for 17 years.
Yeah, man, we're old.
That's really alarming. I don't like that Peter Boulware has been out of the league for 17 years. I was not gonna say it was
Yeah,
that
man.
long.
Asante Samuel's son is like in the NFL now, so it's
Starting corner is a good player.
We're old.
Yeah.
We're past that.
We are. Well, we have Cousin Sam on tonight because there's a lot of craziness that's happening in college football. Folks are very well informed as to what the madness is. Part of like I have this daily confliction of like, do I just want to wait and just read the piece from Pat Forty, whoever, Pete Thamel, after it's all done, and just get the information I need, and just wait for the song and dance to be over and just the musical chairs to move around, because the daily updates, they're overwhelming. You get the Dennis Dodd stuff yesterday with CBS, and then you see the report that like that part of the Big 12 is trying to become the best basketball school in the country, best basketball conference in the country by bringing in the longtime Nets guy. He has basically a primary basketball background. So it's like, oh, well, they do have Kansas, and you look at their brands and you're like, okay, that makes sense. A way to survive. Well, just because that is the other main revenue sport in college sports. So it's like, that makes sense. Maybe plant your flag there, and that's how you survive.
And Baylor too. I mean, that's the last 2 national champions.
Exactly.
Basketball.
So that makes sense, planting your flag on that in that regard. But football is obviously still king and the biggest driver, and the ACC has this. Everyone now knows what is it? Grant of rights. We've heard that terminology, and I am curious as to what Sam thinks about that. But Florida State is now in this spot where everyone just like they feel like an SEC team, like Clemson, Florida State, NC State. I think in Miami too, probably feel like the most SEC type schools to move into the SEC out of anyone in the conference. But there's
I'd
also
probably
this
throw Virginia Tech in there too.
Virginia Tech as well. I would be okay with that. But you know what's interesting? I had a Virginia Tech guy on last week, and I didn't realize how many different conferences they've already been in. They've been independent. They've been in the Big East. They've been in the ACC. They were in something else, and I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But it was something else, and they've just become used to just bouncing around. So like, we don't care. We'll figure it out. Like the attitude in Blacksburg is like, realignment, alignment. We'll figure it out. We'll be fine. But as a Florida State alum and fan, how nervous are you about the days ahead? Because you don't necessarily have a home, and you might fall out of the Power 2 potentially.
I'm not that nervous long term. I think kind of short term. I mean, depending on how long this goes, how long this drags out for either joining the SEC or the Big Ten, or how long Florida State remains in the ACC. The further away they get from a national title, then, the worry is you don't want to turn into like a Nebraska where, a 18-year-old recruit doesn't remember you ever being good. Mm-hmm. So, and I think they'll have a decent season this year, but I don't know how it's going to take a while for them to get back to, competing for national titles. I think they're definitely at least probably 3 years minimum away from that level. But I think, Florida State, it's a national brand. If you look at whenever they play and, nationally televised games, they, even not being very good, they still do great ratings. So I think it's an attractive school for either the SEC or the Big Ten to potentially add in the coming, next couple years.
That's interesting. We looked at it with the Notre Dame Florida State game. That was a big deal. A lot of folks tuned in. Mm. That was really cool. In Tallahassee, like that's become a good game. And you look at it, Florida State, great brand. Obviously, the Bobby Bowden run is now, I think, underrated because folks like it. I think we talked about this last week, Matt. It was just that like his dominance for that 15 to 20 year span is just insane. A lot of people just remember the end, but they're like the records and the numbers and just the 10-win seasons is just preposterous. But the ACC has this weird grant of rights thing that runs through 2036, and you have mystery schools who have reached out about finding ways around this and like having we pay a little bit at a time of how much we owe to get out of this thing. Like, what do you ultimately want to see happen though, Sam? Do you want to see the ACC figure it out, or do you want them to jump ship? Do you want them to get ahead of it, kind of like what UCLA and USC did and getting to the Big Ten? Do you want them to get out as quickly as possible?
I think at this point, probably get out as quickly as possible. I don't really know if there is like a long-term solution for the ACC. I mean, absent, Notre Dame deciding to join the conference, which I don't think is going to happen. Especially they kind of did a trial run a couple years ago with the COVID season where they were in the conference, and it doesn't seem like they had any interest in joining the conference with football after that. So I think for Florida State to make sure that they don't fall too far behind with the arms race where schools they're trying to compete with are making twice as much money a year. I think it's probably better that they find a home in another conference sooner rather than later, because I don't think it's going to work long term in the ACC, and that's not just for Florida State. I think that's for the conference as a whole.
What do you think, Matt?
See, to me, the ACC seems like the most solid of the Big 12, Pac-12, ACC. They just seem to have some of those brands, like we're talking with Florida State, with Miami, Clemson, even Duke and North Carolina in basketball. Like they seem, and obviously this grant of rights thing although I'm not convinced that that's really going to keep anyone from jumping ship. It's like money's not real for these people, right? It's like the SEC will pay whatever they need to pay to get whoever they want from the ACC, right? Or ESPN will pay that for the SEC, right? So I'm not convinced. Like there's so many teams in the ACC that do kind of fit jumping in the SEC, like because people have kind of always hinted at Clemson and Florida State, maybe even like a Louisville up there with Kentucky. But I feel like the SEC, you just know they're going to make a sexy move. Like regardless of what they do, like it's going to be sexy. If it's Duke, North Carolina or something, or Florida State and Miami, like they're going to get one of the big time brands. But I'm not necessarily convinced that the ACC is definitely dead. Like with the Pac-12, like the Pac-12 feels like it's on life support, especially if some of these teams jump into the Big 12, like if half the conference joins the Big 12. So I don't know. The ACC, it feels like it's on more solid ground than those other conferences to me.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, overnight. It might take a while for that to kind of fall apart, but I just don't have a lot of confidence that we'll get to that, 2035, 2036 when that grant of rights is up and you still have the same 14 teams that you currently have in the conference. Because I think at a certain point, schools like Florida State, schools like Clemson, schools like Miami, they're not going to just sit by and let schools in the SEC and the Big Ten make twice as much money as them a year and be okay with that.
Well, I read a really interesting piece. I forgot where it was yesterday that this might be the new model in college football. And this is what might save the ACC, is that part of the reason that Clemson and Miami and schools like that, North Carolina, want to leave and are pissed right now is that they've been kind of subsidizing the rest of the conference. So when y'all talk about like the brands in the ACC and like it is a strong conference, Wake Forest is small. Like you go up Syracuse, small. Like you go up and down the list of the schools that they do have. I think where the ACC is in trouble is that there's no question who runs that conference and who brings in the majority of the money for that conference. So without Clemson becoming a superpower, without Miami doing what they do, Florida State doing what they do, and North Carolina doing what they do, they don't make any money. Like they're in trouble. Like if you remove a couple of those schools from the conference, that conference is probably worse than the Mountain West. Like the Sun Belt is stronger in a lot of ways. So I think the way to kind of get them happy is splitting up the revenue, where we're not doing this equal revenue amongst each university. The way to save the ACC is just like, hey, we have to be honest about who's bringing the most money, and like Clemson gets the most, and Miami and Florida State, they're right here, and NC State, North Carolina, wherever it is. But like, they're not going to subsidize Pitt, Syracuse, and Duke football and stuff like that. It's just that I think is the only way to like start the conversation of getting all those schools on the same page. I hadn't considered that, but that is something interesting because you just don't think that all those schools would get on board with it. But if you're Wake and you're staring at, like, they don't have a choice. Like, schools like Wake are like, well, we kind of need y'all to stay together because we're not getting picked up by the SEC or Big Ten. So if this goes south, Wake is a group of 5, like basically FCS school. Like, they drop significantly, and they're in, like, basically like Sunbelt, take us, and we're just in purgatory. So kind of like what happened to SMU when the Southwest Conference closed down in the mid 90s. They were left without a home. Rice was in that conference. People forget. And then when you make that drop and you are no longer in that power conference, the money making conference, things change on a dime. And it's really, really hard to get back to where you were. Houston's just now getting closer to that. But I don't know. I think that's interesting. What do you think?
I mean, if that SEC can steal Texas from the Big 12, then they can steal North Carolina from the ACC. You know, it's like I feel like that's because I think North Carolina is usually the brand everyone talks about. Like, they basically throw their weight around in the ACC. Like, they're kind of the king of the hill in the ACC. So I feel like if you can poach Texas and Oklahoma, I feel like you have no problem poaching North Carolina. Like, I don't think long term, like Sam kind of said earlier, like these big brands in the ACC, they're not just gonna look around. It's basically what USC did. Like, okay, we're better than everyone out here. We're not cool with Northwestern and Rutgers cashing bigger checks than us. That's just not an option. And I think the ACC teams are gonna see that. Like, the SEC wants us. Like, we're gonna join the SEC.
Well, the only reason they're okay with it, like the reason the SEC schools are okay with Vanderbilt cashing that huge check, is because they are in the Power 2, where they're cashing obscene checks. So when the money is so crazy, you're like, all right, I guess we'll subsidize Vanderbilt. Like, that's fine, whatever. We're still making an insane amount of money. But when you're not, and you're looking at the graph and you're looking at the numbers and you're like, we're making a third of what the Big Ten and the SEC are projected to make, like, that's a problem. And if you want us to stick together and be loyal for you guys, then like, you're going to have to split this up, and we're going to have some tough, honest conversations about who's valuable and who's not. It's interesting you throw North Carolina out, because everything I've seen is just like if they were to expand into the North Carolina market, the SEC that is, it would not be North Carolina. It would be NC State. And part of that is we got to think about the academics aspect of this. So the Big Ten, I think part of the reason Notre Dame would not go to the SEC and they would prioritize the Big Ten is just there is a lot of state schools, obviously, in the Big Ten, and that's kind of where they started things. But it seems like they are going to prioritize that more. And I think North Carolina's academic standards would push them more to the Big Ten than the SEC. I don't know. It seems like that would be how it goes. If they do expand, North Carolina will end up in the Big Ten and not, and NC State would end up in the SEC.
I could see that. It's kind of like A&M. Like, you couldn't take Texas from the jump, so you took Texas A&M to get into the state of Texas. Like, maybe you can't get North Carolina, so you get NC State, which is another obviously huge
quarterback.
brand.
People forget
for sure.
Devin Leary, Phillip Rivers, Ryan Finley. Sam, that's a thing. Like, in NC State,
Mike Glennon.
Mike Glennon.
Is that his name?
It's Mike Glennon. I think he's still cashing some NFL checks. Shout out to Mike Glennon.
Sean Glennon. That was Virginia Tech, right?
That was
okay.
Yes.
That's where I was getting confused. But yeah,
that was when
every quarterback every quarterback at NC State plays in the NFL. Jacoby Brissett too.
Yeah. Bill Parcells loved him. Like, that was a whole thing. I remember that anecdote. It's like, he's a big Bill Parcells guy, and I was like, what? Okay, Jacoby Brissett, and there you go. I think he knew Bill Parcells, and Parcells was all about him. Sam, you've got an idea though when it comes to the ACC. Like, you did some research today. You did some homework.
Very scientific.
Yeah, you followed Matt Green's homework thing. He comes prepared. I like it. You knew what you were walking into here. So what do you got for us?
All right. So I got this list. I don't know if you can see it.
You can see that. Yeah, I like it. Okay.
So I was trying to
kind of graphics right there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I try to break out the ACC into 4 groups. So where, schools where they would end up, not where they would specifically end up, but just, schools that I think would be fine and schools that maybe not so much, like Wake Forest. So I got.
We're not picking on you, Wake fans. It's not. It's just reality. We're not picking on you.
Do you have Wake fans that listen?
Yeah, look, we ride and die for Riley Skinner on this program, and as Matt knows, and our ladies in our life know, Sam Hartman was popular in the Green Thomas household. Like the women like Sam Hartman. Have you shown Alex Sam Hartman before, Sam?
Nah, I can't.
You got to do a drive-by picture.
I think Chase was a bigger fan of Sam Hartman than my
got a man crush on him.
Dude, Sam Hartman, he's a handsome guy, handsome quarterback.
Okay, so yeah.
On that note,
back to the realignment talk. Mm-hmm. So for the safe schools, I have Florida State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina. I have the next category is probably safe, which I have Virginia, Virginia Tech, Duke, and NC State, which I think Virginia you could maybe say belongs in the safe category.
So in terms of safe, you're saying just
Power 2, I think,
brand.
right?
This is like a good brand for a Power 2 conference to get.
Yeah, they'll make it.
Mm-hmm. I'm confident they'll be either in the SEC or the Big Ten if we're going the giant super conference route. And then I have the next category, dicey. I don't really know what to think about these schools. I have Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Pitt. And then the last category, the screwed category. So they're just hoping the ACC stays together as long as possible, or they're getting big settlements in court. Syracuse, Boston College, and Wake Forest at the bottom here.
I would agree with that.
I might throw Syracuse in the dicey tier just because they are New York's college team, right? Like Syracuse, it does seem like a bigger brand.
Hold on, Buffalo Bulls, sir. They've been putting on a clinic up there. Buffalo is, I don't know, man. I might put Buffalo up against them.
It's tough. And Pittsburgh's a tough one to rank too. It's interesting how we haven't talked about Georgia Tech at all. Like we're talking about this ACC, all these in Florida and South Carolina, North Carolina. Like Georgia Tech's right in the middle of all of these, and SEC's like, no, we're not interested.
Yeah,
because Florida State, Miami, Clemson, Virginia Tech, NC State feel like they'll probably eventually end up in the SEC. I think North Carolina, Virginia, Duke feel like Big Ten, and then Georgia Tech. I don't know what to do with them.
I think they fall in the Sun Belt. They're out. I really think if Georgia Tech fans this
bring
is
back
rough.
Paul Johnson.
I mean, go to the AAC before the Sun Belt, right?
I don't. Is the AAC a thing after this?
The AAC better than the Sun Belt? I don't really know.
Oh, that's a good question. I think with what the Sun Belt's added and going into this year, I don't know. I think
the AAC's lost too.
Yeah, I think it's the Sun Belt.
Yeah,
the Fun Belt.
That might be true. Honestly, Georgia Tech, man, Paul Johnson, he literally killed the program if they end up in the Sun Belt. He's responsible.
No, Paul Johnson. Hold on. We're not doing this because I'm a Paul Johnson guy. Sam, he has this whole thing. I'm like, no. Paul Johnson got them to an ACC title game. He was going orange bowling with Josh Nesbitt and Jonathan Dwyer.
Multiple ACC title games. And they won one, right?
Yes.
They beat when they played Iowa in the Orange Bowl. Was that 2009?
Yes, I think that's right. I was freshman in college.
Actually won, although they vacated that title, right? So it didn't actually happen.
Hold on. Okay. Let's not kick them when they're down. We have to at least have an honest conversation about Paul Johnson and Georgia Tech. He was still an exceptional winner. It was an annoying brand of football, but that dude won. He won at Southern. He won at Tech. We're not pinning what happened to Georgia Tech after Paul Johnson left on Paul Johnson, because if he's still coaching right now, they're fine. You don't look at them the same way. I promise you. Part of it is just that Jeff Collins is we're gonna recreate Georgia. And it's oh, you're not going to recreate Georgia. That's a bad idea. I think
it's just because Paul Johnson just made Tech irrelevant to high school recruits for a decade. You're just I want to play big time college football, so I don't want to go run the triple option. It doesn't matter who you are. This doesn't prepare you for the next level. If you're a quarterback, running back,
hell, that's Demarius Thomas and Stephen Hill.
But Stephen Hill,
first rounder.
But Demarius Thomas, he also didn't recruit Demarius Thomas.
Yeah,
he just kind of
got Demarius Thomas.
He was on. Hey, he coached him.
He was definitely on that 09 team because I remember he against Georgia, he like just stiff armed, like just threw it to him. He just like stiff armed the corner and just took it 50 yards to the house.
Paul Johnson was 2008 was his first season.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know. They were good once every like 6-7 years. Like they would be like
they were competitive against Georgia. They were beating Georgia on 70-yard kick, like at 70-yard field goals as time expired.
Beat Georgia. He did beat Georgia a couple times for sure. I'll give him that. But they just the brand of football just made that. It just made them so irrelevant. Like Jeff Collins, like at least under Chan Gailey, they were getting the Calvin Johnsons and Demaryius Thomases here and there. Like I don't know, they were getting NFL talent in the 90s and 2000s. Like it's pretty clear distinction. Once Paul Johnson took over, they were no longer getting big time recruits, or getting any like respectable recruits. Like even though he did have some win-loss success,
I don't know.
He's a hard guy to evaluate.
And there you go. I mean, he obviously had a lot of success at the FCS level, and if Georgia Tech goes back to the Sun Belt, like that's who you want to bring back. Like let's do this.
That's a valid point.
I really think Tech fans are in for a rude awakening. I think I think Sam's right. And I think they're a team that then Boston College, I think the number one Syracuse is definitely in Wake. There's no doubt Wake falls out. Like Wake is just completely screwed. I think they're the smallest school in FBS in general.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like 2,500 students or something like that.
Yeah, they're in trouble. Oof.
So what with Georgia Tech, I mean, is there any interest from the SEC to add them? Why? I mean,
they have no market. Like,
is, allowing all the other schools in the SEC to have, more frequent trips to Atlanta in the regular season.
Well, they already do the Chick-fil-A kickoff game to start every year. So they're in Atlanta anyway. And you don't need to, Tech does not have that draw. Like, Matt and I being from Atlanta, we see like there's just no like if you go up and down the list of like Georgia or even Atlanta fans, like it takes time to find. Like if you go out in a bar in the middle of the night in downtown Atlanta, you're bouncing around Buckhead or whatever, you're gonna see Georgia stuff, you're gonna see Bama stuff, you're gonna see Auburn stuff, you're gonna see Florida State stuff, you're gonna see Clemson stuff. It takes a while to see Georgia Tech stuff. It's just not. They're not relevant in Atlanta. Like that's unfortunately just part of it. They're not relevant at all. Atlanta is an SEC, just Power 5 big time football town where a lot of transplants from other Power 5 schools moved in, or they went to high school in Atlanta, went to college elsewhere, and then came back. Like it's just, they don't have that footprint. And I don't think they have the brand to, like the SEC is now the premier brand and they have their pick of the litter, and Georgia Tech is just, they're not there. They have it's just, there's no money in bringing in Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech doesn't want that. They're going 0-2. Like you don't want to go in a super conference if you're Georgia Tech. You don't want to play in the souped up SEC. That's a nightmare.
You'd probably rather do that than become just irrelevant and go to the Sun Belt though.
That's true.
You'd rather get those.
Would you rather win games, checks, Matt Green, or would you rather just get pounded every single week?
You'd rather cash those checks is what you'd rather do.
But as a fan, but if you're a fan of Tech,
again, if they're in the SEC and it's a 28 team conference or something, like, and there's 28 team conferences in college football, it's like if you're one of the teams left over, you are relevant. You're going to start to get some of those second and third tier recruits because you're actually in the SEC. Like,
I'm sorry, did I miss Vanderbilt getting those guys? Did I miss that?
Vanderbilt
they still get those checks, right?
They do get the checks, but they're not recruiting. Like it's not happening.
But if under this scenario, like what's going to happen? Like I'd imagine Vanderbilt will get elevated a little bit because they're just still at the party, right? Like, would you rather go like if I don't know, if Kansas State or I don't know, Oklahoma State is just left out, or I don't even know, like an NC State or something's left out. Like if Vanderbilt's just in the party, then I feel like some recruits are bound to go there.
I mean, there might be a slight uptick, but I just don't see the path. The money difference and just the academic standards and everything else, like Tech they would get their brains beat in. They're so far behind on the money and recruiting aspect of the rest of the powers that be in the SEC. I
feel like
don't think it would go well
Don't
I
you
feel like
think
it's
they
whatsoever.
like
fit
the
right in
Premier
and
League, like the Premier League. Like when a team gets
Relegation?
promoted to the
Yeah.
top league, it's like no, now they have an influx of money coming in. Now they can get some of these good players because now they're playing in the
It's
Premier
funny
League.
you say that because when I saw someone talk about that, it might have been the Shutdown Fullcast guys who pitched this, but like I can't remember who it was, but I'm all in on that. If that's where this leads, where like if you're bad, if you're like Vanderbilt,
Relegation.
yes, where like the teams that are on the border and they are just killing it, like Boston College goes to the new Big East and they're just going 12-0 for a couple years, and the fan base is back and they're recruiting a little bit better. It's like, all right, you're back. You're in the SEC or the Big Ten for a couple of years, and we'll see how you do. Rutgers, you're out. Boston College, you're in for a couple of years. That would be fun, and the pressure of not being bad and being relegated in these super conferences, that'd be must see TV. Where it's like a week 12 game where like Rutgers has to beat Illinois to not get kicked out of the conference. No one would
No,
watch that game before. I'd be all in. I'd be
I
all in
wouldn't
on
hate
that.
that at all. And that's the same thing in the Premier League. Like that
Yeah.
becomes a separate storyline. It's like, oh, now these teams are fighting to stay in the league. Like that it is definitely entertaining.
Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I mean, that's where it all seems like it's headed. Is headed towards more like the Premier League. That seems like I mean, college football is like the most similar to the Premier League of all like American sports, and I think if you reach a point where we have these giant super conferences where there's like 25 teams in each one or 30 teams. I mean, how are you supposed to schedule that? So maybe you do have a system where the bad teams you're funneling down, and the better teams at the lower league you're bringing up to make more compelling TV.
There's definitely a lot of parallels with European soccer and the college football model. And it's funny that they literally threw out this Super League idea like 2 years ago, and people just rioted. It was just like, it was not okay with European soccer. But we're here in college football. It's like, well, yeah, we kind of always knew there was the haves and have-nots anyway. Like we've always just been pretending that so many teams are competing on the same level. It's like, might as well just cut it out. Cut out the middleman. Stop pretending. Like let's just put all the big boys in one division of their own.
I just wonder, and this is a fear of mine, is I think folks aren't ready for this, but like Akron could just be a club team in 2 years, where the group of 5 schools that are just getting checks and staying in business essentially because they're getting those check games from the Power 5 schools at the beginning of the year, like those are going away in a couple years. I think it's just gone. And once those are gone and we have these new leagues and it's really figured out, I just wonder what that means. We talk about the Sun Belt. We talk about just teams being relegated. I just wonder what that means because those schools are going to have to make humongous cuts when they're not getting those SEC, ACC, Big Ten game day checks anymore. And I think, like, I just don't know how it'll work. I mean, you might have to go to the FCS model where FCS, I think they have 65 scholarship players versus the 85 in FBS. Maybe that's what you do. You have big scholarship cuts and you just have a lot more walk-ons and that kind of thing. But I don't know. I think that's going to be something really sad that's not being talked about enough because folks don't care about the MAC schools and stuff like that. But all those kids, 99% of those kids are not going to the next level. They're not going to play in the NFL. And they're getting a free education at those schools. So I think what sucks is I think a lot of those free rides for those kids are gone. I don't think they'll exist in a couple years, which is just going to be something that people don't talk about. It's like, oh, they don't make any money. And it's not the powers that be's responsibility to subsidize these other football programs. But it's also like, you're still making an obscene amount of money. And it's a net positive for, I mean, America as a whole, because it's putting a lot more kids through college that may not have the means before that. It's also just fun. Like there's the regional aspect and Maction on Wednesday nights and stuff like that. Like that bums me out. That will be gone. Like I understand the games, and like one of the things we learned from the COVID pandemic that we also cannot overlook is that fans want meaningful games. And that COVID year, it was like, all right, Ole Miss, Florida, right out of the gate, let's go. And an all SEC schedule was hugely appealing. Everybody was like, awesome. We don't have to have this made up game. Like Florida State doesn't play Jacksonville State one weekend. And you're just like, we're getting this off the calendar. No one wants to go watch this game. And you understand that. But on the flip side, man, that does a lot for those kids and it does a lot for those programs. And I think it's just a net positive overall. And it's like, if that puts a bunch of kids through school and it helps a bunch of people out all across the country, I mean, I don't know, that part bums me out.
No, I hear you for sure. And I think we said that at the time that 2020, after 2020 happened, like the SEC was going to figure out this is really all we want anyway. We don't really want to play Charleston Southern and all these whatever, FCS schools and everything. I could see the Akrons and the Miami of Ohio's of the world surviving this, but I think working at the College Football Hall of Fame, I should know this number off the top of my head, but I think there was something like 780 colleges playing college football, right? And in all levels, NAIA and everything. It's like, if you're just banking on one check from a huge school to fund your entire program, it's like you probably don't have a real legitimate program to begin with. Like, let's just be honest. So I could see like this maybe killing Division III, Division II football, but maybe some of those bigger FCS schools, North
Dakota State,
like the Montana State. The world. Yeah, who's the one in the Old Dominion? I guess they're Division I.
They're Sunbelt now,
FBS now. So it's like those type schools, James Madison, like maybe they can still
just moved up too.
Sustain. Oh, is that right?
They're in the Sunbelt too. Sunbelt's just gobbling up everybody. Yeah,
it's getting great. So, I could see some of those schools surviving because there is some level of just relevance. Like you said, like those Wednesday night games, Thursday night games, like those TV contracts with ESPN can still be funding that conference, right? So, yeah, like I do hate because there's going to be some casualties to this just Power 5 or Power 2 playing only each other. But I think ultimately that's what the fans want. And, it's a shame, but something's going to happen. There's got to be some sort of, repercussions from it.
Sam, what's your gut reaction? What do you think ultimately happens with Florida State? What do you think they do based on this administration and what you know about where their head's at? I mean, they just pulled away Link Jarrett from Notre Dame. So you have this premier basketball program, which like Leonard Hamilton, he's just the guy minding his own business, lottery pick after lottery pick, Scotty Barnes, Patrick Williams, Jonathan Isaac. It's fine. No big deal. I'm just going to keep pumping out lottery picks. And he's just chugging along, and I think they should be pretty good this year. They got a big international prospect. So I wonder where their head's at because money has been a big thing. Like I've talked to Ingram Smith on this podcast about it. Obviously, Bud Elliott's really plugged in on Florida State, and hearing like where the money issues are and the donor base and stuff like that. I wonder from your perspective, where are you at? Do you think they make the jump to the SEC at some point? Do you think the ACC Pac-12 handshake agreement for some sort of, which I still don't understand, like the winner of both conferences would play each other in Vegas to become the super conference champion? Like, I don't understand how that works, but all right, I don't know what we're going to call that winner, but does that like guarantee a playoff spot? I don't know what that would even entail.
Do we just change it to the Coastal Conference?
Oh, I don't hate that.
The Atlantic and the Pacific division.
I could get behind the Atlantic and Pacific divisions. The Atlantic and Coastal, we never learned those divisions. But
no,
I
no one ever did. Hold on, Sam. You're someone who literally is heavily invested in ACC football. Could you name who's in which conference right now or division?
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay, let's do it. All right, let's see if you can do it. Cousin Sam, you're on the clock. Coastal first.
Coastal, okay. Miami, Virginia, North Carolina, Duke, Georgia Tech, Pitt. Is that 7 teams?
That is 7.
Miami, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Pitt.
Did you say Virginia Tech?
Virginia Tech.
Yeah. There we go. We did it. You couldn't get. I'm telling you, man, it's crazy. Virginia Tech. See, like it's just no one remembered this. Coastal Atlantic. Like what? What are we doing here? Divisions are just they're silly.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to do it North and South because then it was essentially old ACC versus new ACC if they did it that way.
And it'd be fitting for the ACC to, when they finally get rid of the divisions, then the conference falls apart. That would be the most.
And that's what's going to happen with all of these super conferences, like where it's going to be 2035 and be like, you know what? It might make more sense if we divide our super conferences geographically.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, that's what the conferences were to begin with.
Yeah, they're going to reinvent conferences and divisions is what's going to happen. So we're going to have like the SEC division within the SEC, like the Southern Division in the SEC. And then we're going to have like the Pacific Division in the Big Ten, which is like Cal, Stanford, USC, and UCLA. That's because I do think Cal.
It's just like the streaming services. Eventually, these are all going to just be owned by the huge companies. And then we're going to be flipping the channels. It's just going to all be, it's going to reinvent the exact same thing we had.
Just more confusing.
They're going to rename the SEC to the ESPN conference, and the Big Ten can be the Fox conference.
Exactly.
But who cares? Like, it's not going to make sense. Like, I would rather do that because, like, what sense does it make? Like, the Big Ten with the 35 teams, is that what we're calling it in the SEC?
They got to figure out how to keep hiding the number in their logo.
Yeah, they're stressing the Big Ten TEN these days. It's like, don't think too. It's the word 10. Don't think about the number 10.
I remember the first time I saw back when it was just when it was 11 teams, when they had the 11 hidden in the logo. It blew my mind the first time I noticed that.
Yeah, that was great. I was equally as blown away. Best logo of all time.
Ooh,
it's up there with the Montreal Expos and the Milwaukee Brewers. It's classic.
You're just doing it all across the board. Okay.
It was a great logo. The
Brewers it blew my mind when the Brewers logo, when I found out that was an M in the mitt. Did y'all always know that?
That's
I
what
did
I'm
not
saying.
always know that. No.
See, that's what I'm saying. Like, I didn't know that. And then you see it and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I never noticed that. And then you can't unsee it. It's pretty cool. Well, what do you think happens, Sam? Ultimately, you can become clairvoyant cousin Sam tonight. Like, what do you think actually happens to the ACC in the coming days? Because I think this will get cleared up. I don't think a lot of these schools want to be left behind. So I think there's an impetus. The fact that we're seeing so much talk about media rights and like, oh, we're like the part of the Pac-12 ACC stuff is that like, oh, we can redo this deal and we can get on with ESPN and we can figure something out. I think there's a strong impetus that like Phil Knight's in the room now and all these other big donors are like, hey, we're taking care of this. We're not dragging this out to 2036. We're not doing this at musical chairs and just the will they or won't they for the next decade. I think this will move faster than a lot of folks are expecting. So with that being said, what do you think is the ACC here next week? Is that still a conference? Are they partnered with the Pac-12? Do you think that handshake agreement is something that happens? What do you think ultimately happens to the ACC?
I don't think the Pac-12 partnership happens. I'll get that out of the way. I think that's just, trying to throw ideas at the wall and see what sticks. I think the ACC, in the short term, it's fine. It's still going to exist. It's not like the ACC is going to just cease to exist in, the next year or two. I think eventually, the next couple of years, I think probably as schools try to figure out how to get out of this grant of rights, I think it'll probably be some collection of Florida State, Miami, Clemson. I mean, maybe North Carolina. I could see them fitting in either the SEC or the Big Ten. A collection of schools that end up in the SEC. Because I think the SEC too, they'll probably want to play some defense with the Big Ten, where, as we saw with USC and UCLA, I mean, geography doesn't matter anymore. So I could see the Big Ten trying to add schools in the South to try and get, on the SEC's turf for their footprint. So I think the SEC could be receptive to those schools wanting to join the conference, just to make sure that they keep, they lock down Florida, South Carolina, get their foot into North Carolina to prevent the Big Ten from trying to get into that region. I guess as far as like the Big Ten, I think they'll eventually add schools in the ACC as well. Maybe North Carolina, Virginia, maybe Duke, stuff like maybe Georgia Tech. I don't know, schools like that. They'll probably won't do anything until Notre Dame decides whether it wants to join or stay independent. I mean, they're really in the best situation out of anybody. I mean, they can just say, we're going to stay independent, and, you know, all the other schools or all the other conferences can't do anything about it. And they still might get their own access to the playoffs. So it's almost like they hold all the cards to everything.
I just feel like Notre Dame, the only way that they join the conference is if they put a playoff mandate where it's like you cannot compete in the college football playoff without being in a conference.
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about whether or not this is now when they're going to join the Big Ten, and I think there's a better chance than there might have ever been, but they're still don't have any reason they have to join the Big Ten. They can still remain independent and pretty much do what they've always been doing.
I'm rooting for the ACC just for the hysteria. Can you imagine if it broke tomorrow morning that Notre Dame has put in papers to join the ACC and they're just going to partner up and expand, and they're just going to pilfer some other schools, and they're like, we're coming back. We're building this thing. Like, that would be hilarious. Like, Notre Dame could throw a huge wrench in this if they wanted to. They were just like, the ACC was good to us. They let us play in the conference in 2020. We're obviously in it for every other conference or every other sport. Like, we'll just go ahead and do that. And everybody else is like, oh, whoa. I don't know if this is a strong take, but I think Stanford and Cal end up in the Big Ten in the next week. And then I think Washington and Oregon end up in the SEC in the next week. I think both schools end up in the SEC.
See, I'm rooting for one, we know something's going to happen tomorrow because that's just what happens.
That's what happens
with
on
our
this
show.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm rooting for the ACC because I think the healthiest version of college football would be like 4 16-team conferences or something.
And that's still in play, folks. Like that, we should say.
But SEC and Big Ten are at 16 right now. So it's like they can't really add anybody for that to necessarily stay put. So I feel like the ACC feels like they're on solid ground. If they could, maybe they want to add some teams from the West Coast, or maybe they, wanted to add a Kansas or a Kansas State or something, Oklahoma State. I don't know. But like if they could just get a couple good brands in their conference, there's a chance that they can hold on. But it's like if a couple start getting poached away, if like Florida State and Clemson get, especially, I think that was a good point you made, Sam. Like I've seen the Big Ten flexing that now they have the 3 biggest TV markets in the country with New York, Chicago, and LA. Like it only makes sense to try to just extend down to Miami and Florida State too. I think that would be a game changer, not only for the Big Ten and who's conference supremacy, but also like if the ACC loses Florida State and Miami, I feel like the conference is done. It's like I feel like that's like the chink in the armor, and now the floodgates could open, and Virginia Tech, Clemson, it's all up for grabs after that. So I'm rooting for the ACC just because I could see a version where we have, maybe a merger with the Big 12 and Pac-12. They kind of take, I don't know who takes who, if the Big 12 is consolidating with the Pac-12 or if the Pac-12 is consolidating the Big 12, but I could see a version of the playoff because I think the playoff is going to 8 teams regardless. And so I think a version of the playoff with 8 teams and 4 automatic bids, I just feel like that's a healthy version of college football. And it's like because 4 automatic bids from these 4 major conferences, like you're not worried about, the AAC or the Sun Belt getting on my automatic bid. I think the big time conferences could sign on to that better. So I'm not necessarily optimistic that that's what's it's going to be, because it's starting to look more like we're going to see the just 24 team conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's just the NFC and the AFC essentially.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily like healthy for the sport, for the long-term health of the sport, is to have these big super conferences, I guess. And even with like, Florida State specifically, I mean, if there's a way to make it work in the ACC, I mean, there's definitely advantages to being in the ACC. I just don't, with the financials, it's almost like it's too big it's insurmountable. Like if they have an opportunity to leave, I mean, you don't really have a choice. You have to take it. And I don't think it's if you had all these healthy conferences, it would be great for the sport. I mean, I think having a healthy Pac-12 is healthy for the sport, but that's not going to exist without USC and UCLA. So,
yeah, the more I think about it, I remember there was a few years ago, there was the rumor about Texas and Oklahoma going to the Pac-12. Like, I almost wish that would have happened. It feels like that could have created a more balanced, like, 4 regional, kind of just power conferences or something. But I don't know, with the SEC just being as stacked as it is, it's hard to envision more than just 2 power conferences. And like you said, I don't really know if that's what we want for college football. And Notre Dame, if like you said, if Chase, if the Big Ten, because that's who I felt like Stanford and Cal were the teams that were getting left out, along with Oregon State and Washington State. Those seem to be like the 4 that
the
aren't
reason I
involved in
think
any
they
of the
get thrown
rumors.
in is scheduling. I think you have to have some other. USC and UCLA cannot be the only West Coast teams in the Big Ten. That cannot happen. So I think
That's
they're
a good
gonna.
point.
I don't see a path where that's the case. They have to have some local games. They have to have some close games. Yeah.
Well, and you would have Stanford and USC in the Big Ten. It's like, Notre Dame, what are you waiting for? Like, you're just not going to be a Big Ten team, but you're going to play Stanford and USC and Michigan and Michigan State and Indiana. It's like absurd. Just join the conference already.
My gut tells me the ACC is going to find something, and I think the fact that the grant of rights stuff exists is going to keep them in play for stuff. Like, they have more leverage than the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is the one where I'm like, I don't think they have any leverage to do anything. And I think the fact that the Big 12 is looking at building like the super basketball conference, I think they're going to get those 6 teams, like the Arizona State, Utah, Colorado. They're going to pull. And if they do that, the Pac-12 is over. And at that point, it's over. And then you have a Power 4, to what Matt's saying, where like, I think that's a possibility. I also think we're people who are really concerned where it's like the Big Ten, the SEC will just be all the super conference. What people have to understand is that part of the downfall and what other schools saw about playing an SEC only schedule or a Big Ten only schedule in 2020 was like teams that usually go 6-6, 7-5, we're going 3-9, 2-10, and
somebody's got to lose those games.
Someone has to lose those games, and I don't believe they have the stomach for building as much money as they are going to make in the super conference. You have to have some cupcakes. You have to have the Cals and the Stanfords. Like, you have to bring in those teams because it's not going to be Wake. I think Wake's too small, unfortunately, where like they still won't have a seat at the table. But I do think the not premier brands, but the C's and the B's will find their way into super conference more than folks might expect, because Ohio State wants some of them. Like, Michigan wants some of them in this conference. You do not want to have a situation where Ohio State has like Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State, USC, Washington, or Oregon all on the calendar in the same year. Like, they don't want that. Like, they have no interest in that. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And I think the 30 number for each conference is actually more likely than like 16, because I think if we get to that point, they're gobbling up an entire conference basically. And that's probably the ACC if they do that. And they split the ACC 2 ways, Big Ten and the SEC. But I think as of right now, I think we're going to have a 10-year gap. I think the ACC is going to add a couple random teams. I think everyone's adding. So who stays alive? So
who are they getting though? Who are those teams? Like, where are those teams? Are they?
UConn probably is in.
California?
So you add for the basketball front. You bring in UConn. You probably bring in, I don't know, USF,
like Memphis or something.
Memphis, like, maybe.
What does that do?
It's not. It's just adding. It's just assets. It's just like adding some people, and you're just like, we're just throwing stuff at the wall. Like, Boise might find their way into the ACC. I don't know. Like, that would not surprise me if they make a call. San Diego State. Like, I have no idea, but I do think that's kind of where it's going.
And I think the Big 12 is going to get a Power 5 school before they're going to get San Diego State or something, right?
Who's available? Who is going to the ACC right now? I don't think they can pull a Power 5 school.
Really?
No, I don't think they can.
I think the teams we haven't really talked about the most, who I kind of think could be the dominoes to kind of just keep the whole thing going, is Oregon and Washington. Like, it feels like Oregon and Washington are the only like assets or entities from the Pac-12 that like everybody wants. It seems like no one really, Cal, Stanford, whatever, who Arizona State, like no one's really getting excited about anyone but Oregon and Washington. And I feel like if the Big Ten get Oregon and Washington, like you said, kind of to get someone to pair in the West Coast with UCLA and USC, I think that's going to show the SEC like, okay, we can't be done yet. Like now that they're going to Oregon and Washington, now we have to go get Florida State and Miami or whatever the case may be, Duke, North Carolina. Like they're going to do something. I think if Oregon and Washington can stand tall, like and stay in the Pac-12, and maybe the Pac-12 poaches some of the Oklahoma States and TCUs of the Big 12 or something, Kansas, like that's, I think, the only way that the Pac-12 can really survive is if Oregon and Washington don't jump ship. But I think if Oregon and Washington are out, then I think the boulder just kept rolling down the hill even faster.
Well, I think that's it. Like Oregon, Phil Knight, it's already out there. It's like he wants to be in the SEC or Big Ten. Done. Like that's it. Like that's all I had to see where I'm like the Pac-12's over because Oregon does not want to stay and be the leader of this conference. Like, and if they're out and Washington's out, like you said, Matt, like the conference just can't survive. So I think the Pac-12's out. And then I think the Big 12 survives and become like, you know, what's weird. It's going to be like the Power One for basketball potentially. Like the football season will get through it, but basketball season, like we're running this with Arizona and company and Kansas and the premier brands there. But I don't know. And the ACC is just going to like survive by scheduling luck, basically, where their grant of rights just really worked out. And then maybe a little bit at a time they get pulled apart. Like maybe one school leaves, like maybe Clemson, not Clemson, they're probably the biggest. Like maybe North Carolina and NC State are the only two that dip. They get out and NC State winds up in the SEC and North Carolina, the Big Ten or something. I don't know. I think it will be incremental damage to the ACC. I don't think it's going to be like the ACC implodes, but I think it's silly to believe that all five are left standing like 2 weeks from now. I just don't see how that happens.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. And like you said, I don't know what this does in all the other sports. Like I feel like this all kind of makes sense in football. We like know there's a clear like hierarchy of who the good programs and good conferences are and everything. Like that's not the case in basketball. Like 64 teams make the tournament. Like you don't even know which conference is the best year in and year out. Like, oh wow, had a little thunder. I don't know if you heard that. But,
got some ASMR going. I like it.
Yeah, so like Gonzaga or something, do they end up in the Pac-12? Like, I don't know. I feel like when you start talking about all the other sports, it feels like all this super conference realignment, everything should almost just be exclusive to football and let all the other sports keep doing what they're doing.
Well, I mean, UCLA and USC aren't moving outside the Pac-10 or outside of basketball and football. The rest of the sports are staying.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't realize that. And that makes sense. It just doesn't seem feasible for your soccer team to go to Champaign, Illinois to play
on a Tuesday
game.
And then back to like the traveling schedule for non-revenue sports is crazy. I don't know. Sam, were you about to add something?
It's just that, I don't really know what happens with all that. It's with the basketball. I mean, you can just tell how much like all this stuff is football. I mean, Duke's probably like the biggest basketball brand there is in college basketball, and whether that's like TV or just name recognition, and they're on like the maybe list for what conference they're going to end up in. I think with the ACC though, I think if schools from like North Carolina start leaving, that's kind of when the conference is in trouble, because that's really like kind of that's like the Los Angeles for the Pac-12 is, North Carolina, maybe Virginia schools as well. That's like really like the heart of the ACC footprint. So if North Carolina and Duke or NC State decide they're bouncing, then it's only a matter of time before all the other schools that have options are trying to leave and end up leaving as well.
And to me, Duke and North Carolina seem like a package deal, like with Oklahoma and Texas and USC, UCLA. It feels like wherever they go, they're going to go together. And that's why, like, you're talking about the Big 12 being the premier conference in basketball. Like, the SEC has been a very good conference in basketball the last few years. Add Duke and North Carolina to that, like, that's a premier basketball conference right there.
For sure.
So, and I just, like I've said before, like, Greg Sankey's going to make the sexy moves. Like, the SEC is going to make big boy moves. So, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do, but it's going to be big.
I would say too, and like here's a PSA and like something I feel bad about Pac-12 fans. where Pac-12 After Dark is the thing, right? Like everyone's just like, oh, I got to watch to see what's happening late with a Cougs game or an Oregon State game. And, they're fun. They have their ups and downs, but like ultimately they are a victim of being in the wrong time zone. Part of the issue with the Pac-12 is something they cannot fix, where you can't do the nooner. So they're not on when college football starts. Like right after game day, guess who's not there? The 9 a.m. kicks in Southern California, Cal, Oregon, Washington. And then most folks are pretty tuckered out by the 7 o'clock SEC ESPN game or the ABC game. That's it. They're out. And if you're not on that ABC game at night, or you're not like the Pac-12, when you look at the television stuff, I'm like, yeah, they're at a disadvantage. Like the Pac-12, it should be harder. There should be a discrepancy because they're in a bad time zone for college football. Like they are in a rough spot where like most people don't watch their games across the country because the most amount of people live on the East Coast in those major cities, like in DC, in New York, in Miami, in Atlanta. They're all in bed, or it's just like they can't watch them at noon when college football is ready to go because it's 9 a.m. over there. So I feel bad because the Pac-12, I think something that's overlooked with that conference is that they were dealt a bad hand by geography and time zones. And I think that's part of it. I think they deserve some, like they made some bad decisions, but like ultimately it was always never going to be as profitable and as many eyeballs as the other main conferences because the time zones just limit what they can be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point. It's just kind of bad luck. And I also, this is just a personal theory that I've had for a few years. And, you don't know if, correlation is not necessarily causation. But I've always thought the biggest appeal that USC had was they were the pro team in a huge market like Los Angeles. And now they got the Rams, they got the Chargers. If USC is a middling conference team, they're not really interested. Like they don't live and die with it. We've seen Knoxville. It's been a while since Tennessee was competing for conference or national titles. You wouldn't know it if you just looked in Neyland Stadium on a random Saturday. Like they pack that place out. Same with Lincoln, Nebraska. Like they pack that place out. They love football. USC is like, the football team's not that good. I got something else I can do.
I mean, Miami's the same way. Like that's something that will always be a problem. It's like, hey, do I want to go to a game and watch 6-6 Miami, or do I want to go on the beach? Like they're Miami Heat. Like they're with LeBron. They're still getting there after the first quarter. They're still getting there fashionably. They're like, we'll get there.
They were
when we get
bouncing
there.
Game 6 of the finals.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's a different thing. I don't know. That's a tough one. Notre Dame, though, Sam, ultimately, do you think Notre Dame winds up in the Big Ten, SEC, or do you think they stay independent?
I don't think they end up in the SEC.
Okay.
It's so tough to predict them going to a conference. They've been independent forever, and I mean, I guess eventually that day will happen where they join a conference, but I think they would be one of the last teams to join if their SEC and the Big Ten have like 25 teams and any like halfway decent program is in one of those two conferences. I think Notre Dame will join, but I think a lot more dominoes have to fall before Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. I think they just have they have too much leverage right now. They don't need to join the Big Ten.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think there's 0% chance that Notre Dame ends up in the SEC. It's a cultural thing. I just don't think like the SEC collectively has just hated on Notre Dame for way too long to have them join the conference now.
You know what's funny too? They all hate, like the SEC fans hate, but then you see Georgia fans are like, we went to the Mecca. We went to go see South Bend, Indiana, and they're like, what a show. What a beautiful stadium. What a time. Like they all were like, what a great venue. Had so much fun in South Bend. Anyway, Notre Dame sucks. And
if there's anything that makes the SEC, it's the pageantry and tradition and all that. And Notre Dame is obviously right at the top with everybody when it comes to pageantry and tradition.
I mean, they recruit at the same level. Like Notre Dame would compete. Like Sam, our uncles would not agree with any of this, and would be like, "Oh, Notre Dame and the SEC, they're getting clobbered." And it's like they're putting together top 5 classes over and over again. I think they're number 2 for this upcoming class. Like, no, they have the blue chippers. Notre Dame would be fine.
Number 1 right now.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, so they would be fine. They would win a lot of SEC football games. And you know what? All of our uncles and everybody else, you know what they would love to go see? Tennessee and Notre Dame. Like they would love to go to South Bend and watch Tennessee and Notre Dame. So it's like I've never understood the hate. I've never understood the hate for Notre Dame. It's like we all understand that it's this amazing pageantry and like this really cool history and everything else, perfect uniforms, all that kind of stuff. And you would love to have an excuse to go there. So why do we pretend like they're just not this super cool entity in the sport?
Well, I think about like why Notre Dame is irritating though. Like it's like a sitting up on their high horse type of thing. Like not joining a conference. Like what is that garbage? Like join a conference. Everyone is in a conference. Like get out.
Hold on, Army, friend of the pod, Jeff Monken, not in a conference. Army
if
doing
Army,
just fine.
If someone tried to get Army in the conference, they would join the conference. Like I feel confident.
Oh, I don't know about that. They were in a conference.
Once someone was interested in BYU joined the conference.
Hold on. Army was in like the CUSA before, right? I want to say they were in the CUSA.
That sounds right.
Yeah. They're
Navy
fine.
in that too.
They're cruising.
So I don't know. It's Notre Dame. I kind of think I do agree with you. Like I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of at that point. Like if they join the SEC, then they'd be routinely playing games and getting that exposure in the Southeast. And I think that just would allow them to recruit even better than they already do.
You know what I just realized? Navy or Army is going to wind up in the ACC in the next year. I think that's coming. I think that's happening. I think we're getting one of the armed forces in the ACC.
I think that's if all the big schools leave the ACC, and I think that's who Wake Forest and Boston College are reaching out. We got to get Army, we got to get Navy, see if UConn's available. That's.
Hey, that's the way to lose.
That's the ACC in 2030.
But that's a real ACC. Those are all along the ACC coast. At least it would make sense geographically.
Geography doesn't matter. How many times do we have to say that, right? I think that's the number one way to get rid of your big time brands. If they went out and added Army and Navy next year, like Clemson and North Carolina are like, what in the hell is happening in this conference? We need to get out of here now. Like things are bad if they're adding Army and Navy.
Hold on,
like,
Army's a great program. Army, Jeff Monken's done great work over there. It'd be fun. You wouldn't want to watch it. Did you see that Army Wake Forest game last year? It was amazing. The back and forth, like Wake couldn't stop Army, Army couldn't stop Wake. Yes,
yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
That's must-see television, sir.
That was an incredible game. Unless you like defense at all, that was an incredible game.
No, I'm all about it.
Chase, you mentioned something. Maybe if the Big Ten adds Navy, maybe that's what'll finally get Notre Dame to join the conference.
That would be
Navy
cool.
Game.
I mean, I'm here for it. I don't know. We'll have to see. I think Notre Dame stays independent. I think like you guys until it actually happens. I'm not gonna hold my breath. But Matt, on your front, how do you think? Sam answered it. How do you think it ends? Do you think we end up with 4, with 2, and everybody else is just in this weird group of 5, and they're not on the same level, and they don't have the same number of scholarships, and it's just not scheduled, and it's like this weird FBS 0.5, and then FCS, or what do you think happens?
Well, I feel like I'm afraid I think it's just going to be the AFC and the NFC, and we're just going to get the Big Ten and the SEC, and if that's basically going to be it. I feel like none of us have really talked about the idea of a Power 3. It's either a Power 4 or a Power 2. Because Power 3 just doesn't make sense. Not that Power 5 ever made sense. Like, it's not like a real clean number or anything. But like Power 3, that seems stupid. Like we could never do that. So it feels like we have enough good programs to have 3 conferences, right? If the Big 12 and Pac-12 and ACC kind of got together and had 16 to 20 teams, like that could be a really good conference, but that just doesn't seem like something's that's gonna happen. So I feel like if you're putting a gun to my head, like what does college football look like 10 years from now? Like I tend to think it's just gonna be like the Big Ten and the SEC, and then that is FBS football, and then everything else is kind of a step below.
I don't think that's where it goes. I think there's been a lot of pushback. I think they've seen the pushback. Like if you look at all of this, like college football fans are not happy about any of this. Like I think there is a significant, like having talked to some folks, like my guess is a lot of calls have been sent to the president's office and the AD's office at a lot of these schools of like, hey, what are you doing? What is happening? Can you stop? Like the Wake Forest fans, they're like, are we even Division One after this year? Like, can you stop? Like, I guarantee you that is happening all across the country right now. Where
So
even the
much
big
Wake
boosters,
Forest bashing on this pod
well,
right now.
we love Wake. We're very pro Wake. It's more of like, I just imagine the big time boosters who are involved in NIL and who have a big say in a lot of these universities are like, hey man, we're not getting left out. And there are some big boosters everywhere. And I guarantee you they are leaning on school officials that are higher up about like, hey, we cannot have this situation where it's just NFC and AFC. Like, we understand the TV aspect and all that kind of stuff, but like, there has to be some sort of seat at the table for a lot of these schools too. Like, there has to be something and not leave them in this weird middle ground that I think would leave a lot of bad taste in the mouth of a lot of different schools and a lot of fans like around the country. That's a lot of people that you're just leaving behind and expecting those people to watch those big games. Because that's the other part of it. It's like, you want to remove the importance of an Oregon State, but you also want those Oregon State fans to watch Washington, Michigan. And if you discount their university and you kick them out of the conference, guess what? The pie is going to shrink. Like, that is going to shrink when you cut out all of these schools. Part of the reason is they have this ostensible belief that their team can do it. Like, we know the blue chip ratio. We know they can't win a national title, but you're still in a Power 5 school where you feel like it's a possibility. But if you kick all of these programs out and you go to that 2-team model and you do the NFC AFC, I think ratings, which have already been going down every single year, college football attendance is going down every single year. You do that and you cut the pie that much more, I think ratings tank. So when you're attributing everything to ratings and TV, you're forgetting that people still have to watch, and you're forgetting that there are so many people in Corvallis, so many people in Pullman, so many people in Lubbock, so many people in Tallahassee that will be like, all right, well, then we're just not going to watch college football anymore. Like, why? Like, our team doesn't matter. We can't win a national title. So why would we watch Texas, Tennessee? Like, what? We're not going to do that. NFL fans are okay with the NFL, AFC, NFC model because they're all in the same league. They all, like, every market is still in a Power 5 market and they all have a chance to win a Super Bowl. That's not how college football works. It's always been a regional thing. And it's always been this silly belief that, hey, if we recruit well enough or we have the right quarterback or whatever, we have the right kind of run, we can win a national title, or we can be like Wake, who has this 10-win season, Pitt, who has the right guy, and they have Kenny Pickett, who goes in the first round. Like, anything's possible. You kick all those people out, I think the ratings tank. And I think all the money that they think that they're going to make and what the ratings are going to be, I think they're in for a rude awakening, because I think you're going to lose so many people that they're just assuming are going to transition over to the national games and when it becomes a more national sport. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think too, I mean, you're talking about some of the schools that would get left out. I mean, what about if you're in this, supersized Big Ten? What if you're like a Maryland fan or a Rutgers fan or, even somebody like Iowa? I mean, they've had success right now, but what happens when you're adding like USC and UCLA, and if Oregon and Washington and Notre Dame and whoever else get out of the mix, that just knocks you further down the pecking order of the conference. So, rather than like 8-4 being the norm, what happens if it's like 5-7, for some of these kind of mid-tier programs? I mean, eventually like apathy would set in to those fan bases as well, even if you're still getting the big check from either the Big Ten or whatever in the SEC, if you're Arkansas or South Carolina or, whoever you want to throw in that example.
I agree with that for sure.
I think it's tough because, like, as it goes to the pro model, I feel like we kind of can't see the different dominoes that also have to fall in terms of it being a pro model, right? And I think that would include some sort of more even playing field, and maybe it's a salary cap or whatever you want to call that sort of, what you can spend or whatever name.
Oh, I'll push back against that. That's never happening. Like, the difference with that is like they would have to unionize and there would have to be NIL regulations across the board, and Congress would have to step in. The Wild Wild West is here to stay, based on what I've like. I think the antitrust lawsuits and everything else. I don't think that would. I don't think that's possible in college sports.
So
I don't.
And that could be true, but I think you're gonna see, just if we do just have these couple of power conferences, like those teams are now do have more resources and are capable of being championship contenders. So I think just like the New York Jets are terrible every year, but their fans still care. Like, I mean, that could be the case with a college program, because you see the Bengals have the number 1 pick in the draft, and then 2 years later they're in the Super Bowl. Like, you could see something similar with an Iowa or a Wisconsin, or who else, Maryland, you want to throw in there, that maybe with the resources being what they are, they're at least now more comparable to those big powers, and you're one of them since you're in that conference, and maybe the parity is a little more than we once thought. Maybe 7-3 teams are winning conferences. Maybe 8-4 teams are actually winning conference championships, and it looks more like the NFL, and you don't have to be undefeated to be in the playoff.
What do you think, Sam?
I guess I don't. The more and more this becomes like the NFL, like what's kind of the breaking point where you just say, well, why don't I just watch the NFL then?
Yes. And I think that's what you're going to do. I think that's what's going to happen for a lot.
I think the breaking point is, I think there is a lot of things we like about the college game that's different than the NFL game. That's the reason we kind of prefer Saturdays to Sundays. But I think the biggest thing that college has going for it is that the president of UGA isn't going to threaten to move the team if he doesn't get a new stadium, right? Arthur Blank, we were thinking of moving to London or LA maybe, okay, now I got that stadium. Yeah, we're going to be in Atlanta forever. We love this place, yada, yada, yada. Like, a college team is never going to leverage a fan base in that way. And I think that's what can always allow college to feel like a more part of the community, to feel like it's like ingrained in the culture of this place, because 50 years ago, the Braves weren't in Atlanta, right? Like, the Braves have been around for 150 years. They played in like 5 or 6 different cities. Like, Georgia football has been around for 150 years, and it's been in Athens, Georgia all 150 years. So I think there is still something that college does have that the pro game can never replicate, because pro sports are just corporate entities. And even though like college sports, it's getting more that way, I think there's still like a foundation that college has that the pro sports don't have.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess like my diploma says Florida State University. I don't have a piece of paper that says I'm a, Eagles fan. So it's
Hold on. Are you going Eagles over Jags? Is that what it would say if you had an NFL fan thing? Would it be?
I like both of them. I mean, I'm pretty casual NFL fan these days. It's I'm putting on Red Zone on Sundays.
There it is. Red Zone's where it's at.
I'm
a Red Zone kind of NFL fan.
I can't do Red Zone. I can't. I'm not built like that. Red Zone is not for me. Like, it's just too much.
I'm emotionally invested on Saturdays, and then Sundays I just want to be entertained.
I think that's probably how a lot of people are, though.
100%. I'm right there with, like, I can't get into one NFL game. Like, I find myself Monday Night Football. Like, I'm not as into Monday Night Football. Like, I'm a huge NFL fan from 1 p.m. to like 6 p.m. on Sunday. Like, and I might even fall asleep at those 4 o'clock games. If I'm just sitting around watching football all day, you get comfortable on the couch, just fall asleep. Like, Saturdays, I'm hooked into any sort of game. Like, I want to know everything that's happening. Football, it's like Sunday, just give me a casual viewing option.
See, I love them all, and when I say all, I mean high school too. Like, I go to those Friday games and I cover high school, and I love interacting with these coaches and learning from them and watching these games up close. And it's different. The reason I like those 3 separate is that they're all extremely different. They're all so different so that you can get something else out of each kind of game in each kind of city. So if you go to a high school football game, you go to a college football game, and an NFL game, it's all different experiences. You watch all 3 on TV. They're completely different experiences. But if the college football model loses what made it so unique and the play style and unique, like, we will lose the air raid. We'll lose the Hawaiis and the Boise's and the triple option and the variety of what we liked about college is that like you could watch a West Virginia and Pat White at one moment, and then you can watch just Alabama's ground and pound if you want to do that. The NFL, it's pretty standard. Like a lot of folks, they run the same stuff, and I think there's like 17 people in the Shanahan coaching tree now that are either head coaches, have been head coaches. It's just a lot of zone scheme stuff. They're all running the same kind of thing. So I love the NFL too, but it's just a lot of the same, just with some superior athletes and unbelievable quarterback play that you just can't find anywhere else, where it's just mesmerizing. Like there's nothing better than watch Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes go back and forth in an AFC championship game. Like that's absurd. AFC divisional game this past year. Like that was insane. It was literally who has the ball last. And they, unfortunately with the overtime rules, the Bills just lost out because they didn't get the ball back. So that is why the NFL is king. Rules. Well, I mean, they changed. I mean, I think they did just change it, so both teams do get it now to start next year. But I will say, like, that's the reason the NFL is king. Like, you cannot replicate that kind of drama with like the Brady versus Manning stuff. Like, that is just what it just can't be touched. Like, nothing's ever going to touch that. Like, everyone was watching Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes and completely locked in. That is a totally different thing. But that's not why you watch college football. You watch college football because you have some sort of emotional attachment, or like I'm in the building and kneeling. You could feel like it's a coliseum, like you're at this crazy, like an NFL game never feels like that. Outside of like the Packers or the Bills, it's like, it's not the same. Like you're in there and it's absurd. The difference and the feeling.
I got a question for you, Chase. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the state of college football right now as opposed to what it was 40 years ago? Like, do you think it's a better product now than it was 40 years ago?
It's hard to say.
Because I would argue that college football kind of has been watered down in the last 20 to 30 years because everyone and their mom has started a football program. Like, everyone has a football program. Like, I just pulled up Tennessee's schedule from 1980. They opened with Georgia, then played USC, Washington State, at Auburn, at Georgia Tech, Alabama, Pittsburgh, Virginia, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Like there's not a cupcake on that schedule other than Vanderbilt, but obviously you're still playing them every year. But I think the scheduling was just much more compelling back in the day before we just had all of these MAC and Sun Belt and all these different conferences. Like I think you did see a lot more of the Power Five playing the Power Five. So while I was giving my doomsday prediction of just a Power Two, I would prefer we find a way to still have like 60 or so college football, Power Five, whatever you want to call it, college football teams in like 4 conferences. I think that's the healthiest sport. But I don't think it's necessarily doomsday to get rid of these cupcake games because these games haven't always been around in college football anyway.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. I mean, it seems like everything comes full circle. Like we talked about to start off with, it's like they reinvent divisions and conferences. It's like, oh, we're reinventing better schedules and no cupcakes. And we're getting that off the calendar and we're going to downsize to make this all work. I don't know. I think by and large, it will survive. We'll get used to it. Like, I think what will really change it for me, if there was one thing that would change it, is like, if the game day experience didn't feel like a college game day experience anymore. If like walking around campus and like attending games and like being around other fans and it didn't feel the same, that's when I would be like, man, this is so commercialized and this is so unplugged from the university, where like if a lot of these guys aren't even in school and we're doing contracts and like they're not on class, like I'm not seeing Zakai Ziegler around campus multiple times a summer like I am right now. Sam, I don't know if you mentioned, like I've seen Zakai Ziegler like 4 or 5 times on campus, and we made eye contact finally this past time and I didn't know what to do. So, and I was like one of those, I'm like, does he notice that like we, for whatever reason, just run into each other a lot? So I like did this weird wave and he was like, it was just not great. Did not enjoy any of that. It was
That's terrible.
It was really rough for me. I didn't know what to do, but that's like one of those things that's cool. It's like you see them they're kids. Like that's something that's cool, is you just see them around campus. When you're in Tallahassee, I'm sure you're just like, oh, that's cool. He's just around. He's not like us because he is a superstar athlete and he's just he's playing college football at a Power 5 school. But game day at Tallahassee is why, like, you love that. Like, you were getting up for it. It was a big event. You had friends, family. It's like this whole cultural thing. So if you lose the culture on game day, I think that's when it's just like, man, it's just not the same. It's just not what college football is, because it's not even about the games on television themselves. If you're in the town, it's about going. It's about being around the other fans. It's about the pageantry. It's about the tailgating. It's about hearing people in the background being like, Tennessee's beating Georgia by 30 tonight. And you're like, hell yeah, they are. Yeah, we're going to beat Georgia. Like, that's part of it. I don't know. I think that is a big part of it. And as someone who's been in the building so much in the last 2 years, that would supremely bum me out. And I hope that they protect that at all costs.
But in what scenario? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's something that, for a long time, when I was still going to more games, I mean, I was getting that experience each day. So it's been a little different for me as a fan. Is, the last few years, I haven't attended any games in the last few years. I've just been watching it on TV. So
he's in Colorado now, Matt. He moved away from that area.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
He's not still local Florida, and he's not just like, I'm not going until they fix this. The Travis Hunter stuff, unacceptable.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to get to games now from where I live. But yeah, it's definitely, I going to the games. That's a big kind of draw to the whole experience. It's not just going to a game. It's an event on game days.
And I don't really foresee a scenario where it's no longer an electric campus atmosphere. I think that's what college football has always had over the NFL. It's just something about the atmosphere. And like, I don't see, like, obviously you're going to, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, when Wake Forest no longer has a Power 5 football program, like, yeah, they're not going to care about college football. I'm not sure how much they really care right now to begin with. Obviously, there's some Wake Forest fans, but it's not the same national brand as a lot of other schools in the ACC or nationally. But I don't see a scenario where you're walking not down the street in Knoxville, Tennessee on a Saturday in the fall, and it's not just people lining the streets and everyone's just amped up for a college football game today. I think that's what if the game is being played, the people will come. Like, it's going to be a great atmosphere.
And the
you
BOLS
might just be
is
robbing
back.
the people that aren't left out.
Yeah. And I'm worried about college baseball and college basketball and how this is all affected, because as college baseball is just an absolute delight. Man, that was just this year in Knoxville for the Tennessee baseball team was just an experience I will never forget, being at so many of just preposterous. Like, it was, I don't know, man. Like, I hope that's not changed, where it's like, okay, we don't care about anything else. They're non-revenue. Like, we're moving on. Like, you're not getting any money, because, like, right now they're doing a lot of additions to Lindsey Nelson, and we'll see if they keep pumping money. But, like, if all the focus shifts to the Super League and football, what happens to all the other sports? Because I like that there's variety, and it's that I don't have to only live for Saturdays in the fall. That, like, it's fun. I can go watch Tennessee basketball and it's a good product. I can go watch Tennessee baseball and it's a good product, like women's basketball. Like, it's all good all across the board. And I hope that that's not left out in the cold too. If it like, oh, we're all football all the time.
Would you call Tennessee an everything school?
I might call them an everything school, Matt Green.
Everything but football.
Oh, there we go.
I'm telling y'all, like, 10-2 is not out of the question. Like, Tennessee is in a terrifying time, and we'll end here.
There's more hope than since like Fulmer was the coach. I mean,
no, it's probably Butch.
Maybe one of the Butch Jones years.
Yeah, Butch got the people going.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever that year was when they had A&M, was that 2016 when that A&M game when they were both like 5-0, 6-0 or something?
Yeah,
college or in Kyle Field.
Mm.
That seems like the last time Tennessee was truly a contender. Like, that was 2016, right? And
it was the last time they had a big time quarterback like Dobbs. Like, Hendon Hooker is that guy, and it's like, if he puts up the same kind of TD like we talked about, Sam, guess how many programs were a top 10 offense in 2021 that did not win 10 games? How many teams did not do it?
Is one of the answers Tennessee?
They're the only team in the top 10 of offense last year who did not win 10 plus games. So if they're a top 10 offense again, I just don't know if it's likely in a sport that is so defined by offense. If the tempo's there and Hooker's better, Tillman's better, and they're putting up 49 a night on everybody, like it's just they're going to win more games by math. Like they're just going to win more. And I don't think they can really compete for a college football playoff or a championship or anything. But I think 9-3 and 10-2, or injuries and they have a terrible setback season, they go 6-6, and then it's just madness. I think one of the two happen. I don't think the clean 8-4 happens. I think it's either a big leap to 9-3 and 10-2, or a scary step back where teams around the SEC figure out the tempo and figure out this system and make it a really rough year for Tennessee. Like, I think it's one of the two. Either Heupel's going to dictate what other teams do, and you're like, this is my world now. I run this offense, and y'all are going to deal with it and hate life. Or it's like, oh, we got to switch things up, and this is a problem. So I don't know. That's why they play the games on Saturday, as they say.
Oh, see, that's an interesting viewpoint you have there, because I feel like most people would just consider Georgia and Alabama just automatic losses. Like, I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of what you're hinting at with the 10-2 thing. But I tend to think, like, we've talked about that magical 5-0 start. Like, if they can be 5-0 and hosting Alabama and Tuscaloosa, that's just going to be an electric atmosphere. I tend to think they'll drop one of those games, either to Florida or Kentucky or LSU. I'm not really sure which one. But then it feels like they're going to drop like a game they shouldn't, like a South Carolina, a Missouri or something. They'll be like one of their toss-up games they lose, and then maybe one of those games they just inexplicably shouldn't lose. And I feel like it's going to get them to a nice clean 8-4.
I just don't think it's going to go like
that. Maybe 9-4, win the bowl game.
I don't know. I mean, nothing matters until the Florida game. Like, I cannot wait to be in the building for that one. Just the unease, because I think they beat Pitt, but it's still getting through Florida until they get that monkey off their shoulder, like whatever, monkey off their back. Like, until that happens, Florida's owned Tennessee for 20 years. So if you're ever going to get over that and you're ever going to do it, it's at home against Florida in week 4. Like, that's it.
I think the negativity of the fan base will do a U-turn if they lose to Florida this year.
If they implode in the Florida game, because a lot of those games have been close, and Tennessee's been the better program a lot of those years, and they still just lose in horrific fashion. And if they do that this year with this Florida team and this change and where Florida's at right now as a program, there's going to be a lot of couches on fire in Knoxville, a lot of boats on fire, a lot of chaos.
Because they had the Felipe Franks to Cleveland. Was that 2017? Something like that. The last year of Butch Jones, and then there was the Antonio Callaway one.
Yes, that was the rough one.
Yes. There's definitely been some close heart, and then you actually finally beat Florida. Then you drop a couple inexplicable games late and still don't win the East.
Yeah, the monkey's back on.
Butch beat Georgia and Alabama in the same season. Like that
Georgia
happened.
and Florida,
excuse me, in the same year, and didn't win the East. That's all you need to know about Tennessee sports in like the last 20 years.
5-star hearts, baby.
Like that is you fight like beating. Just imagining any Tennessee fan like beating Georgia and Florida the same year, and you're like, you didn't win the SEC East. No, that's what happened there. But we'll see. Sam, this was great catching up, man. I'm excited to see you. You will not be at the engagement party along with Matt. You'll be in Colorado, but I think you'll be at the wedding. I think y'all will meet in person at the wedding potentially in September.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Oh, was this a football season wedding? What is
Hold
this?
on. Hold on.
Yeah, no. How did that decision get made?
Hold on. It got made because there were dates that I was okay with doing the wed. Like it may or may not be a coincidence that the wedding is falling on the day that Tennessee hosts Akron at noon. Like it may or may not have.
It's not the Florida weekend.
No.
What date is this?
September 17th.
Okay. We got Georgia at South Carolina at noon. I don't know. I'll see. I can work with you.
I know it's not.
I was thinking about going to that game this year, and then it got South Carolina at noon. Like that place is going to be hotter than the surface.
It's going to be hot as hell, man. And actually, you know what's weird is the Tennessee South Carolina game in the building for that one was extremely hot, and that's when we broke out the black uniforms. Was that one? It made no sense. You brought out the black uniforms for this scorcher. it didn't matter. They stepped on South Carolina's neck in the first quarter, and that was it. But yeah, no. Akron, I think I can be pulled away, and I'm good burning the Akron home game for that one. I'm okay with burning.
Isn't
that.
there another like filler?
Watch out for the Zips.
Oh, yeah, Joe Martin. They have Tennessee Tech or Martin, one of the two, later this season. But it's just that one, Akron, and then the opener. But that's Thursday night against not Bowling Green. They played last year, Ball State, on Thursday night. That's going to be fun. That's
like a reoccur. Are they going to start doing that in the future where they play?
Yeah, they're just owning that Thursday now, basically, because no one else is on. So they just get the SEC network, and they just have this all eyes on them, and no one watches the Saturday nooner Tennessee Ball State. But people might tune in on Thursday.
What, last year, and wasn't the year when they played App State? Then that game was like really close. I think that was
a night game,
game as well.
They almost lost that one. That was like the fumble out of the end zone thing.
I think that was the season that, with Butch Jones, when they had a lot of hype going into the season. And then
it started off bad.
Got derailed in the season opener.
Yeah, that was not great because that was the fumble out of the end zone. Yeah, that was crazy. But yeah, no, I think it'll be fun. And like being in the building for the Joe Milton airmails last year in the opener, just like, oh my God. But the arm talent, man. Joe Milton has a cannon, and it's not all there.
I saw UConn Michigan is that day, so I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it. I can't miss UConn Michigan.
It's understandable. It just means more up there. Sam, Matt, thank you for making the time as always. Well, Matt, as always, Sam, as a guest appearance. A lot of fun catching up, my friend, and I will talk to you both very soon.
Thanks for having me on.